one thing we like to do is to share the link to the slide deck, because we do have a lot of web links in here. There's also a QR code for people in the room. You may want to use your phones to get that QR code so you can get access to the web links. And also our slide deck is at this web link here. It's a bit.ly link. And you're going to need some of these links. So I'm going to pause here for just a few minutes to make sure you can get access to that. Okay, was everybody able to get the web links?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next slide. And here's where we're going to start with Alex's presentation. But before we do that, right up at the top there, Alex had put together a quick survey that he'd like us all to take. The web link is there. Again, it's a bit.ly link. And so we're going to pause here and just take about 5 minutes or so that everybody has an opportunity to click on that and to fill out that survey. And then by the end of the presentation, hopefully the survey results will be there and Alex will be able to take a look at them. So let's just pause here and everybody can click on the link if you have gotten that access from the previous slide. So please feel free to get started.
Great. Awesome. So thank you everyone for taking a minute or two to check out the survey. Just a little bit about me. My name is Alexander Spike. I'm a climate justice coordinator with Airlines Houston. My background is atmospheric sciences at the University of Houston. There, I studied a little bit, researched a little bit of about air quality and air pollution in the area, especially East Houston along the ship channel, and later came to Airlines to do something about it. There's always something about doing research that feels a little detached, right? You're studying the problem, but what can you do about it? And that's what I see Airlines as its mission. We're one of the largest environmental nonprofits in the Houston area. Our principal program is the Community Air Monitoring Program, where we do what industry wants, where we monitor for nitrous oxides, benzene, carbon monoxide even, and see who is being honest about their emission inventory and who is not. And now recently we've expanded outward to include things like transportation and climate, which I am part of that expansion. So a bit about my project. So we're out here talking about carbon capture technologies. This is a technology that not everybody is super familiar with, but industry, municipalities, the Department of Energy, researchers, universities, they're all talking about it and they're all carrying out big projects. There's several here in Houston planned, and the Inflation Reduction Act put out a whole lot of money to make these projects happen. But regular people like you and I, and community members in areas where there's already a ton of industry, which would be targets for these kinds of technologies, are not always included in the conversation. And that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to go to regular people, inform them about what's going on, share what knowledge we have about the technology, what does it promise, what can it achieve, who's carrying it out, and for what purpose, right? So I want to expand who's included in the carbon conversation. Part of that includes the survey that we filled out earlier. Here's a QR code for it. If you didn't get to fill it out earlier, that's perfectly all right. I'm going to show you the QR code here for a little bit longer, and there's one at the very end of the presentation. So I'm asking everyone who's able to come here to give this a fill out. And again, I think I'll leave the QR code lingering at the very end of the presentation. We'll linger on that for 30, 40 seconds. I'm also going to ask Joe to send y'all it a little later. But that's we can figure that out later. So let's zoom right out. Why do we even want to capture carbon, right? So there's this thing called climate change. When industrial action, automobiles, all of this uses combustion, right? The combustion of fossil fuels with a byproduct of emitting carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. which in greater concentrations is able to capture more energy inside the Earth's atmosphere and heat it up. That's why, so you see at like pre-industrial levels, we were sitting at like 310 to 320 parts per million, and now we're sitting at like something like 418 to 420 parts per million in 2022. For our cases here, we can even abstract this and forget all of this, technobabble, and say carbon or climate change represents the transfer of carbon and from rocky formations deep in the planet, coal, oil, gas, what have you, and putting it in the atmosphere. To return to atmospheric stability, equilibrium, you have to undo that. But we haven't quite done that yet, and there's consequences for that. Here in Houston, we feel that very keenly. We're a Gulf Coast state, and we experience disasters like everyone in the Gulf Coast area. Remember Winter Storm Uri back February? I think that was last year now. God, it wasn't 2 years ago, was it? Time flies, huh? Then there's also Hurricane Harvey, where we got 52 inches of rain. The volume of rain that came down in that storm actually depressed the crust under the city of Houston. That's a sheer weight of the rainfall that came down in that time. That was also, and these are both examples of extreme weather becoming more frequent and more intense as climate change continues on. As of now, we're sitting at something like, it's either 0.7 or 1.0 Celsius global average temperature increase. We have goals at an international level to sit at 1.5 or even overshoot it slightly and come back down. But that is all a little bit beyond us here. So where does carbon come from? There are a few sizable sources, and this changes depending on where in the world you're at. Here in Houston, the vast majority of it is coming from transportation. Now, there's some caveats to that. The city of Houston is a little bit different than, say, the metropolitan area or the Gulf Coast area. So the city of Houston, formerly not as much industry in it, so you see a whole lot more representation of transportation. But there's a caveat to this. Gasoline doesn't just appear out of nowhere, right? That has to come from industry. Industrial sources, the refineries out east, Beaumont, LaPorte, Galena, Pasadena, they are who turns raw petroleum products into gasoline or motor oil or what have you. So industry here has a sizable influence on the rest of the pie. So again, we're sitting at something like 1.0 Celsius global temperature increase with a goal of 1.5 under the Paris Climate Accord. We're sitting at a pretty sizable amount already consumed. So the amount of carbon that we are okay, quotation marks, to emit is narrowing. And so reducing carbon emissions is a huge priority, or removing it from the atmosphere. So climate change has not been experienced evenly across the world, or even across the United States. Air pollution, air quality, flooding risk, extreme heat, these are all experienced by certain communities more keenly than others. Here in Houston, that is a familiar story. East Houston suffered flooding damage more so than, say, Katy, or the Northwest Reservoir neighborhoods experience a whole lot more flooding than Southwest. It falls along familiar racial, economic, and social categories. So the sort of carbon economy and the carbon world we're living in today reproduces that situation. And decarbonization, meaning the transition from fossil fuels, from the carbon economy, toward renewables, toward electric vehicles, public transit, increased green space, what have you, represents an opportunity to correct those blunders, to correct those mistakes, and to present and to, when we carry out that transition, to lift all boats. A very tragic metaphor considering sea level rise, but a rising tide lifts all boats. So let's go right back to carbon capture technology. So carbon capture is it's pushing on 10 to 20 years old, but it uses a very familiar sort of mechanism. Put it simply, carbon dioxide comes out of a tailpipe, it comes out of a smokestack, it comes out of a steel furnace. And what carbon capture wants to do is scrub it, remove the carbon from that smokestack and move it and then stuff it underground or somewhere else. So it's usually expanded out to carbon capture, utilization, and storage, because there's actually some pretty clever ways you can take the carbon out of a smokestack and use it in a creative, utilized way. For example, I don't know if y'all heard, but there is a bubbles shortage, a sort of carbon dioxide shortage in the production of soda. Carbon capture is, you can actually capture the carbon out of a smokestack and recycle it for carbonization in a beverage. That's one clever way, but there's a couple of other pretty ingenious technologies that are bouncing around. How can we take carbon dioxide and use it for recycle it and use it for another source? But for the most part, it's stored underground. You remove the carbon from the smokestack, you move it by train, boat, truck, pipeline, maybe to a well or some sort of well underground. It could be offshore or on land, and keep it there for a whole long time using sophisticated pumping systems. So why are we investing in this now? So we talked a bit about how there's an overall urgency to prevent catastrophic climate change. That is priority number one. But additionally, there is the Inflation Reduction Act passed by the Biden administration earlier this year. I should say mid last year, huh? And then the Infrastructure Act. The Infrastructure Act also had sizable concessions to to boost out this industry. Before the Inflation Reduction Act, the 45Q tax credit, which basically means the federal government will pay a firm a certain amount of money per ton of carbon removed from the atmosphere, was doubled. I think it's something at $150 a ton of carbon now. That was boosted an incredible amount. Carbon removal is itself not a productive industry and requires a pretty sizable amount of government intervention to turn into a profitable industry, which can incentivize that behavior. And as such, there's now a market, an industry, a whole layer of the economy that could now generate carbon credits or store carbon. And so you see a lot of heavy polluters, sources of carbon dioxide emissions now moving into this industry to store it. And in some ways, that's good. I don't want to be entirely cynical. If these firms have a sizable responsibility for the carbon economy, for transitioning the world economy away from carbon dioxide emitting sources, then they should invest it, and that's a good sign. Now, what's special about Houston is we're the energy capital of the world, right? We have the technology, we have the know-how, we have an incredible amount of number of energy firms, from Chevron, Calpine, Air Liquide, Valero, Shell. They're all headquartered here because there's a whole lot of talent, a whole lot of already built up industry here. So Houston, already having a ton of resources, is well positioned to benefit a whole lot from that carbon capture boom. Additionally, if you need to put the carbon somewhere deep down in a well, we have a whole lot of wells here in Houston. We have the Gulf Coast area, the coast itself, with wells that are not returning a huge amount of crude anymore or gas anymore. That's an opportunity for us to put the carbon dioxide and pump it down deep underground in a particular type of rock which can absorb that carbon dioxide and keep it there, hypothetically, on a geologic timescale, i.e. thousands or millions of years. So I think a good example to start off with is the Petronova project attached to Fort Bend's WA Parish coal plant. WA Parish is the third largest coal power plant in the country. It has 11 power plants and is situated about 150 miles southwest of Houston. The project was part of the clean coal programs of the mid to late 2000s. The project cost about $1 billion, and it was supposed to capture about 90 to 95% of the carbon emitted from its smokestack. This was built on top of NRG's WA Parish. This was this project ended up capturing about 65% of the carbon emissions that came out of the plant, though. This was like the first generation carbon capture device. This was supposed to be the proof of concept that it can be done. Now there's some caveats to this. It's now closed. What Petronova was doing was capturing the carbon out of the smokestack, piping it out west, and then using it functionally to frack. The carbon dioxide is pumped underground, which swelled up and pushed out residual fossil fuel materials, which could then be refined and sold. That was the financial mechanism by which Petronova was profitable for a time. The carbon dioxide was used to recover, enhanced oil recovery is what it's called, recover some amount of oil, and which can then be sold for a profit. When the price of oil crashed a few years ago, and it's still, figuring out, what exactly it wants to be priced at, the project became unprofitable and actually became a financial burden on a plant that was already very old. And so the project was closed down indefinitely. Here. And then we see here at the bottom that the project was actually sold at a firm for a fraction of its original value. You put something like $1 billion of investment into the project, and now the Petronova device has been sold for $3.6 million to a Japanese firm. The original Petronova project was actually financed in part by several Japanese financial and oil firms, which I don't have a whole lot more addition to that. But it is an interesting connection. It's unclear to me the exact relationship between Petronova and sort of international fossil fuel interests. So there's some concerns with carbon removal broadly, right? As we saw earlier, the Petronova project, this premier project, this one that was supposed to demonstrate that this is a viable technology, cost $1 billion. $1 billion for solar and wind is a little bit troublesome to get to nowadays. There's not always enough. There's never enough money to build out solar and wind, especially for the scale of the problem we're facing. We need much more money for these sorts of for the build out of renewable energy, and that hasn't always materialized. So the question is, was $1 billion on a carbon capture plant the wisest use of limited financial resources? What opportunities could have been unlocked with $1 billion in the production of clean energy, rather than trying to tidy up what is, I should say, the third largest coal plant in the country? And ever since there's been concerns and doubts cast upon it from the IPCC, sort of saying that, why are we focusing on this when there are other projects that need funding desperately? There's other concerns too, though. The actual material shipping and storage and removal of carbon is remarkably difficult to do. Carbon dioxide is incredibly difficult to monitor. It gets easier and easier every year with sort of fast-paced increase in technology and sophistication, but it's always been a little bit more troublesome to monitor than, say, sulfur dioxide, what have you. But every step of the removal of carbon is trouble. Removal is a carbon capture project permitted to capture 60% or 90% of carbon. That is almost always up in the air. Our work with Earth Justice, our sort of an allied organization that does the legalisms and permitting work, has found projects for carbon capture that only ask that they be expected to remove 60% of carbon emissions from an industrial facility. Do we, is it actually carbon neutral? Is it actually removing the carbon? Becomes a point of contention. And then how are you going to get the carbon out of the industrial facility and to its sink? Is that being done by train, by truck, by pipeline? All of these are points of transfer of a fuel that, or a material that is under incredible pressure. And that's an opportunity for things to go wrong, for leaks to happen, or worse, an explosion, like you see on the right in Yazoo City, Alabama. In Yazoo City, there was one of the first pipelines refurbished for the shipping of carbon dioxide. and the pipeline burst and exploded. It resulted in something like 27 people getting hospitalized. Thankfully, no one died. But this is the point. This is to say that building out an infrastructure like pipelines or shipping things by train or shipping things by truck does pose a danger. There is a risk of things detonating. Yeah. And then there's also the question of storage. When you ship everything to a well and store it deep underground, one, is it going to stay there? This is a technology that is, again, very new. And it's trying to do something that is usually done by geologic forces over millions of years, right? You're trying to take carbon from the atmosphere and store it down in rocky formations for at least thousands of years. That is something that's not super easy to experiment with, to do, even by computer model. That's an immense challenge. And there's questions about if that can be carried out, if that can be done in a scalable way. And then who is liable if it leaks? Currently, carbon capture utilizes something called a Class 6 well, which only requires that the firm monitor it for 7 years. And after that, it becomes a split liability between the state and the firm. That is a point of contention. If a well leaks, could it be there if the firm is unable to pay for it? Is it now the ward of the state? Would TCEQ or the Railroad Commission, both of which have had shoddy records with environmental cleanup, are they responsible for maintaining or monitoring or cleaning up of a well? Are they responsible for plugging it? That's a big question. There's also concerns about well blowouts. You put something under incredible pressure. If something buckles, if there's an earthquake, if there is a big rainstorm and there's an incredible amount of pressure from the surface put onto it, could it blow out? And then who owns the rights? Who owns the land? Who owns the well? These are all different items that different people can own. That makes a whole lot of trouble for actually carrying out the projects. And that has necessarily resulted in resistance. Pipelines are the premier way to ship things. Liquids under gases under incredible pressure turn into liquids. You could think of natural gas. You could think of carbon dioxide in a similar way. And pipelines, people don't like them. Several sizable carbon dioxide pipelines have faced incredible resistance across the Midwest. Think about Line 5 in Minnesota. Think about the Keystone XL pipeline. These things have faced incredible resistance because they've leaked, because of one reason or another. And that resistance, that frustration, that bad taste in pipelines left in the mouth of rural residents carries on into carbon dioxide pipelines as well, to the point that these big first generation carbon dioxide pipeline projects have only a fraction of the land they need to put down the piping to carry out their project in a safe way. Putting these projects years, if not potentially decades behind schedule. Additionally, there's been local resistance. The city of New Orleans, for example, has banned the construction of carbon dioxide pipelines through the city limits. Now, if there's kind of a question about would you ever have built a carbon dioxide pipeline through the city of New Orleans in the first place? Maybe not. But nonetheless, it adds to a growing momentum of frustration and resistance to carbon dioxide infrastructure. So I want to finish off by saying this is all billions of dollars of investment that is coming to East Houston and Fort Bend County and the New Orleans industrial corridors. Not all these facilities are up to snuff. They've benefited from regulatory bodies who are less rigorous in their enforcement or less rigorous in monitoring, and have resulted in excess illness, excess exposure to emission inventories. Do we want to put money into refineries that maybe that need incredible refurbishment or should probably be closed and relocated or rebuilt? If you put money into a refinery, you're not going to close it down. And therefore you might expose community members even more to the things that make them sick. So question is, who is burdened with carbon capture's consequences? So if you learned a little bit about what's going on in the world, you enjoyed this or anything like that, I encourage y'all to give us a look up on Twitter, look us up on social media, to give us to sign up to our email list and to learn more on our website. I also have my phone number on there in case there's more y'all want to learn. And here again is the carbon conversation survey that I'm going to ask everyone to give another look at, fill out, and provide your feedback on. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alex. That was a wonderful presentation. And so let's open it up for questions. If anyone does have a question, I thought I saw one in the chat. Dora, you had a question. Did the Petro project really net remove carbon?
That's a good question. I think the answer is more than likely not. We're talking about a project, it was attached to the clean coal project of the mid-2000s. To turn a coal power plant neutral is incredibly difficult. And in some ways, maybe it's admirable to try, albeit for the most part, clean coal projects were unsuccessful. If Petro even removed 90 to 95% of their carbon, that still leaves an excess of 5 to 10%. Which is any number of emissions at this point is to be avoided.
Alex, this is Dory, and what I meant was, great, they got 65% out, but then they took that and put it in the ground to frack oil. So they were not putting it in a stable place; they were putting it in a place to bring out more fossil fuels. So how could that be net? I mean, that to me, that sounds like we just spent a lot of money and energy capturing the carbon and then stuck it back in the ground at a profit.
Absolutely. So that was an enhanced oil recovery project. That is, of the carbon capture projects that exist in the United States, enhanced oil recovery has the lion's share. Now, proponents of carbon capture will point out that that's the only way it could be profitable. And now with the new Inflation Reduction Act and the increase in the price of carbon, maybe simply removing it will become a lucrative and viable business model. We will have to see. But
Alex,
yes,
I'm sorry. Another question that I had related to that, the WA Parish coal plant. I don't know too much about the history of it. What are the impediments to just closing down the WA Parish coal plant?
Yeah, so a few things. One, Airlines has a specific program for closing down WA Parish. Alondra Torres, my coworker, is working specifically on a project to close it down. So that is something that we are pursuing. That is something we want to see. The big impediments is that NRG owns it. It is not a public utility. The city, the county, the state does not own WA Parish. And as such, the avenues for getting a privately owned facility closed down is much more complicated, a lot more difficult, and almost exclusively has to be sort of like a public pressure campaign. There are other problems too, though. As we've seen the past 2 years, Texas is not always super great at producing energy when it needs to. Closing down one of the largest coal power plants that generates a huge share of energy is something that the state and NRG are reluctant to do, which is a bit ironic considering it shuts down basically under any kind of pressure from extreme heat or extreme cold. WA Parish, for example, shut down during the close shave the state had over the summer when we were experiencing something like 70 days straight of 100 Fahrenheit degree weather. And WA Parish also shut down during the winter freeze Uri.
Also related to that, do we know anything about the profitability of the power plant to NRG? From what I've read in the papers for other coal plants that have shut down, a lot of them are old and really at the point where they're no longer profitable, much easier to make money from renewable energies. Do we know anything about that related to WA Parish?
So my understanding is that WA Parish is actually a bit of a burden on energy, a financial burden, and costs money to maintain, and is kept open because it is much more expensive to decommission it, to close it down and clean up the area and what have you. It's from my understanding, it is a financial burden on energy. And it's kept open to sort of like provide almost like a pseudo public service, i.e. producing electricity.
Interesting. All right, there's another question in the chat from Dan. I'll read it out. Dan says, isn't direct air capture pretty much a pipe dream? I've read that the Orca facility removes 3 SECS, I'm not sure what that is, worth of carbon generated over a year's time.
3 seconds.
Yeah, I get what you
Pretty
mean.
much experimental. What I've read.
Is Orca is the project out of, is it Iceland?
Yes.
Yeah, so direct air capture is one tactic of removing carbon dioxide. It's basically you put up a big old fan and it has a huge surface area with flowing air, and you remove the carbon that way and pump it underground. So direct air capture is one type of carbon capture project that the Department of Energy is actually financing directly. The Inflation Reduction Act set money aside for 8 different carbon capture projects across the state, 2 of which must be direct air capture. It's a form of carbon capture that has an opportunity to scale up to a point that it becomes like a potential solution to removing carbon from the atmosphere. But as it exists today, these are still, the projects we're seeing like Orca are more of like proof of concept. So that project was never going to, remove a huge amount of carbon dioxide. One more thing about Orca is that I believe they are a project which have explicitly said that they will not sell the carbon credits they generate. That is extremely admirable and very much unlike most other direct air capture programs. Those carbon credits are one avenue by which these projects are profitable. Orca is deliberately operating as a public service in a way, simply removing the carbon dioxide and not trying to recoup costs through selling the credits to someone else who then is able to permit more.
So what are the 8 projects in Texas? Is there a list of them?
So the Department of Energy is funding 8 projects across the entire United States.
Oh, United States, okay.
The Department of Energy has been going from state to state trying to bring more and more people onto their projects. They have 2 set aside for direct air capture, 2 set aside for industry, so things like steel or cement, which are hard to decarbonize. They have 2 set aside for coal, 2 set aside for gas, and then I think maybe 2 direct air capture. They actually came and visit Air Alliance over the summer looking for us to lend them a hand, getting community members on board with potential projects cited in Houston. Part of the Inflation Reduction Act also includes something called Justice 40, which requires that new projects make certain concessions to community members that they cite their projects in. And that is usually done through a nonprofit like Air Alliance or Public Citizen, which poses all kinds of challenges for the carbon capture firms and challenges for groups like Air Alliance who want to maintain some distance from industry.
Alex, would you mind stop sharing so we can get the view of the folks that are on the call? And I'm not sure if we've heard any questions from folks that are there in person at the church. Does anyone have any questions or other feedback that are in person? Mark,
reduction.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, try again now. I unmuted. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I heard you refer to the Inflation Reduction Act. Would you mind repeating what they're proposing to enhance carbon capture and storage?
Yes. So the Inflation Reduction Act increased the refund that someone gets for storing 1 ton of carbon from, I think it's like $30 to $120. So if you have a direct air capture facility and you remove a ton of carbon dioxide before the Inflation Reduction Act, you'd get an amount of money which was not sufficient to cover operating costs. And now this now sizable refund that firms can get through 45Q covers costs and turns into a profitable industry. The 45Q tax credit in that way is supposed to operate sort of like, I'm going to say like almost like a way to get firms to do to remove carbon in a more altruistic way. Before that, the only way you could turn a profit was through the enhanced oil recovery method like Petronova. Hypothetically, with 45Q, storing carbon and keeping it there, not trying to frack with it, is now financially viable. We'll see if that pans out, though.
Thank you.
Anybody else from the church with any feedback or questions?
It doesn't look like it, Joe.
Okay, and so Alex, I'd like to point out that another method which Citizens Climate Lobby advocates for is the stick approach, which is a carbon fee or a carbon tax, but bundled also with a carbon dividend. And if we were successful in getting that passed into legislation, of course, that would create a negative impact on corporate profits. And the way that they could avoid a negative impact is simply by, doing what's needed to remove their carbon and not being able to release it into the atmosphere. So there's that approach as well.
I think one real quick thought I want to share is that, I've cast a very skeptical approach to capturing carbon. It's these firms doing EOR to turn a profit and keep their industry afloat a little longer. This is something that does need to happen, right? We can't sit at 420 part per million. Pre-industrial levels are 320, 350 or something like that. We can't, a certain amount of carbon dioxide is associated with a certain amount of heating. We have to remove carbon. The question is who's doing it, for what purpose, and who's carrying it out. And that is, I think, the crux of the issue.
Yep. And so did somebody want to say something?
Yes, I have
Go
a
ahead,
question,
please.
Joe. Sorry to interrupt, but I have a question, Alex. Thank you for the presentation. This was very informative. I don't have a lot of knowledge on carbon capture. And you mentioned in terms of Air Alliance of Houston that you guys work to make sure that the inventory levels of air pollution for the companies is follow a requirement. Is this supported by the city of Houston, or is Air Alliance a private company that companies hire to make sure that they are within the regulations? How does it work?
That's a good question. So my understanding is that we're a nonprofit that operates independent of the city and with community members. So we provide air monitors. Individuals and impacted communities provide a location for the monitor. We have several programs focused on different parts of the city. We have one set aside for Galena Park. We have one set aside for Pasadena. And we just recently opened or prepared a new network of monitors for Gulfton area in Southwest Houston. So for Gulfton, it'd be monitoring particulate matter coming from trucks and concrete batch plants. For East Houston, like Galena, that might be more concerns with refineries or plastics or petroleum products. We work, I think we have an amicable relationship with like the pollution control through, I think it's the city, but we do operate independently and specifically with communities in collaboration to make sure that we're getting, things are not exceeding safe levels. And then use that information to petition and lobby the city or the county or the state to be more rigorous.
Okay, I see. I see. Got it. Thank you.
That was a good question. Let's have one more question for Alex, and then we're going to have to move on with the remainder of our agenda. Anybody else? Okay. Well, Alex, I'd really like to thank you again. That was a wonderful presentation. And if it's possible, could we get a web link to the slide deck as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
I'll send that to you in a little bit.
excellent. Any closing remarks, Alex, before we move on?
Just thank you again for having me on. Thanks everyone for listening and putting up with this super rigorous, difficult topic that only so many people are super concerned about. This is something this is an industrial investment that is coming down the pipeline. A whole lot of money is being poured into this, and everybody needs to be aware of what's going on and be prepared with knowledge, be able to question and get concessions out of industry when it does put these investments in.
Thank you so much, Alex. All right, I'm going to share my screen again. Ready, see? Sound check. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
the room can hear you.
Great. Can everybody see me?
We can see your slides.
Perfect. Okay, we're now up to the point in our monthly meeting where we always go ahead and make our monthly call to our elected representatives. And so Mark, can you walk us through this?
Yep, you can.
Yeah, so if you have your cell phone, that link, cclusa.org/call, if you can access that, it will ask you to put in your zip code and it will bring up your representative with phone number and also 2 senators. And it will give you a short script to follow. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate here. And then everybody's going to try to do that. Usually we get voicemail, especially on a Saturday, so no nervousness about having to interact with a live person. But the script is helpful. I think it changes depending on who your representative or senators are. So I'm going to let me get my phone up here. And my representative is Wesley Hunt. So I have a number for his Washington office. Going to try that. Hello, Representative Hunt. This is Mark Harrinan. I'm in your representative congressional district in Houston. I'm calling to ask you to help the United States win. Take a look at carbon border adjustments, which would give U.S. manufacturers an advantage in the global marketplace. For example, H.R. 4534, Fair Transition and Competition Act, put a fee on imported fuel to cover environmental costs and emissions. Thank you. Yeah, so Joe, do we want to have people try that
Yes, that's what we always
at this
do.
point?
So I'm going to stop sharing here. So if you haven't gotten to that web link yet, please make a note of it because I'm going to stop sharing. And then we're going to pause here for a few minutes so that everybody can go ahead and make their calls. All right. So some miscellaneous topics to share here. Immediately after this meeting at 12 noon, we always have our CCL National Monthly Speaker, and we have an excellent speaker this month. It's Andrew Jones from the organization called Climate Interactive, which are the creators of En-ROADS, which you may have heard of. And so he's going to be speaking at 12 noon today about En-ROADS. And you can see here on the slide, I'm reading from the quote, what will it take to keep global warming below dangerous thresholds? Thanks to Andrew Jones and his team at Climate Interactive, we have answers to that question. They've developed the climate simulators called C-ROADS and also En-ROADS that make it easy for users to see how combinations of various solutions will affect global temperatures. As Citizens Climate Lobby explores legislation to address climate change, these simulators can show us how to get the biggest bang for our buck. And there's a spoiler alert there, which says pricing carbon has the greatest impact. So En-ROADS is an amazing tool. We always highlight it in our newsletter that we send out for people to click on the links and explore it. I know that in the lobby meetings that I've previously attended with Rep. Crenshaw, we have also actually used the En-ROADS model in our meetings with his congressional staff to show them what the options really need to be to get to where we need to be. So really interesting stuff. I encourage you to go to that, see the monthly speaker after this meeting, or to go to the link to En-ROADS directly on the website. Moving on, another really critical hot topic that's urgent for us. On the slide here, I'm saying we're looking for a few men and women to join our lobbying teams and meet with our elected representatives. We do have a number of lobby teams that are now no longer active. We've lost our leadership on those teams and those particular volunteers, and we're trying to rebuild. So if anyone on this call has an interest in joining any of our lobby teams to work with us, please contact Judith Hyatt. Judith is on the call today. You can put a message into the chat or contact her at her email address here. Okay, we have another item here as well, and this was highlighted in our January newsletter that went out. This is an appeal to teen climate advocates. You can see the graphic on the right, calling young advocates. Our future's future. This is a new climate project that one of our volunteers has started. Her name is Destiny. She's a high school student here in Houston. And if anyone on this call is a parent of a teen that might be interested, please get in touch with Destiny at her email address there. We thank you for that. Another item here to keep in mind that our Citizens Climate Lobby Texas state organization is planning a state lobby day in Austin in March 27th through 28th. And there's a link here to register for that if you'd like to help out with lobbying in Austin. And the contact there is Susan Adams, our regional director. Any questions on that or to register, the info is right here on the slide. Some other miscellaneous topics. Not everyone here might be aware that Citizens Climate Lobby has now expanded the policy agenda. Previously, we were focused almost entirely on carbon pricing, either carbon fee or carbon tax. But now we're also actively going to be advocating for healthy forests, building electrification and efficiency, as well as clean energy permitting reform. And so there's more info there for people to read up on that. And just a reminder that we did have our CCL December National Climate Conference, which was very, very good. A lot of good information. All of those sessions were recorded, and the playlist is there on YouTube, as well as a link to the presentations if anybody has an interest in that. One more item here. This is another CCL legislative success. You may not have heard. One of the bills that we were advocating for, as one of our key asks, was the Growing Climate Solutions Act of 2022. And this was attached to the year-end omnibus spending bill and signed by President Biden. So this was a key critical success that we did have last year with our lobbying that we did. And now we're up to our lever status report, starting off with Judith, if you'd like to go ahead. Judith, are you on mute?
Yeah, I'm here. As Joe mentioned, we have lobby liaison vacancies. If you know anybody in Texas 9, 22, or 29, we're looking for, a liaison or just anybody who wants to lobby in those districts.
And Judith, this is Dory. is it true that it's best if they are from that district, but if someone felt they wanted to volunteer and their district has already got plenty of support, could they offer to be a liaison for one of these districts?
Yes, I think that would work fine. We need somebody who will locate the members that are in the districts so that they can create lobby meetings. The latest call sort of gives an arc for the year in terms of what CCL is asking us to do in 2023. And in spring, they're suggesting that we create opportunities for members of Congress and their staff to interact with the chapter, kind of like what we did with the cookies at Christmas time. And, you know, to have casuals get to know you events and not necessarily lobby meetings. So we should talk about what more that we could do in that area. There's a big push to have at least one constituent for every district in Washington in June. The June conference is the week of June, the weekend of June 10th. So they are, if you're planning on going to Washington, please let me know so we can identify. I was not a member before the pandemic, but evidently the national office schedules the meetings. So your meeting will be scheduled for you and they just need to know who is coming. Is there any questions about that? And then they want us to do virtual lobbying again in the fall, associated with the November conference.
Judith, I have a question for you about the spring in district event. Will you be scheduling a meeting with the liaisons to discuss that some more and to plan something out?
I think that would be the way to go. Yeah. So I will work on that.
Great. Thank you.
If anybody else wants to attend that meeting, just let me know if you're not a liaison.
I'd like to attend, Judith.
Okay.
So on the topic of lobbying, do we have any questions from anybody or any feedback about lobbying?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm new to this monthly meeting, so I want to understand a little bit what is the scope of a person that it's just part of the group or just wants to volunteer.
So do you, I think you came in a little bit late, but I asked people to put in their national legislative district. Do you know what district you're in? So
The congressional district, you know who your
congressional district
representative is in the U.S. House of Representatives?
Oh, no, I don't know.
So I can help you look that up and you'll know which district that you're in. And if you'll just, leave me your email, I'll get in touch with you in the chat and we can work on that.
Okay.
And so to help answer your question some more, and also that information will be on your Texas voter ID if you're a voter. But what we do for our lobbying is that we form teams based on which congressional district we're in. And we do have one CCL member appointed as the leader of the lobby team to help organize that. We plan out with the lobby teams. Was there a question?
No.
We plan out with our lobby teams what the strategy will be for each of the meetings. We develop a slide deck that we're going to present with specific information about climate change and our climate advocacy work. And we always have some specific asks. We always ask for the congressperson to support and to vote on specific bills that we're very interested in getting passed. So that's basically the objective. And we prepare for that by having volunteers join lobby teams and having meetings, internal CCL meetings to really prepare for that. So it's really a very exciting kind of an opportunity. It's very rewarding. I've participated myself in several lobby meetings with Representative Dan Crenshaw in the past, but I've now been redistricted. So I'm now in the Sheila Jackson Lee district, and I'll continue with that. I highly encourage anybody that's not involved in lobbying to really get involved. It's extremely rewarding. All right, I'm going to move on now. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to echo that. That's what being a member of Citizens Climate Lobby, we are lobbyists. And so getting the chance to learn how to and to actually lobby in a group, it's a wonderful experience. So Diane, I hope you'll take full advantage of that.
Yep. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Try to keep on schedule here. This is our grass tops lever that Court normally provides a status on. I don't think Court is on the call today, so I'll just provide some very quick background for new members. We have each Citizens Climate Lobby chapter is organized with what we call levers, and we have 5 specific levers to help us move forward with our climate advocacy. Grass tops is one of the levers, and the purpose of the grass tops lever is for us to reach out as a team to local community leaders, which could be, for example, government leaders in the city of Houston or Harris County. It could also be local business leaders that we reach out to. And so we're always looking for opportunities on how we can actually reach out and communicate to local leaders to get their support for our climate advocacy work. And that's basically what it is. For anybody that's interested, we have Court's email there, and you can contact her directly. I'm going to move on to the next slide. This is the grassroots lever that Mark will give a status update on. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm whatever we call the leader of the grassroots. So our main purpose is we're trying to raise political will among ordinary citizens in our community. And we do that mainly through 2, I guess, hands-on activities. So one is presenting a formal presentation, and we usually do that as a team. So that's enjoyable, not having to do the whole thing by myself or one person by himself or herself. We do have 2 presentations coming up this next week on Inflation Reduction Act climate benefits. So tomorrow, the church that I attend, I signed up to do a virtual presentation. And then Wednesday, the Bay Area Sierra Club requested we inform them about climate benefits of the Inflation Reduction Act. So yeah, there's going to be a number of us on each of those. Then we have tabling opportunities that we try to find places where we can set up a table, talk to people as they pass by, find out what their interests are about doing something about climate change, and then inform them different ways that we're trying to manage that. It's been a while since we've done any tabling. Of course, with COVID, we kind of stopped that, but we're actively looking for opportunities. If anybody has any ideas like farmers markets, environmental occasions.
The one on Vinehorn, the Congregational Church, that farmers market, they are looking for us to come back at some point.
Yeah, I think Jim Tucker's in charge of that, and we can get in touch with him. The other outreach to the community that we do is the once a month calling to our congressional representatives.
Another form of lobbying.
Yeah, that too.
All right, any questions or feedback for Mark from anybody on the call? Mark, thank you. I'm going to move on. The next lever that we have for our chapter is called the media lever. Media is critically important for getting our message across. And there are various types of activities that we do for media, where I'm actually our media lever leader. One of them is simply by communicating to our chapter through our monthly newsletter. And so I always keep track here of the most recent newsletters we have sent out. You can see there the link for the December newsletter, and most recently the January newsletter we sent out on Monday of this week. We're also trying to be active on print media by sending letters to the editor with information related to climate change, of course. And here's an example where back in December, I had some free time, and I keep track of news articles using my Google News app, looking for keywords on climate change and so on, or things related to that. I saw a very interesting article in the newspaper in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which sounds weird, right? Why would I be interested in that? But this was a very interesting article, and you can see there the title was called "Removal of Coal/Natural Gas Could Mean Wyoming and Neighbors Face Blackouts This Winter." And when I read that article, I saw that they were referencing our Uri winter storm extreme weather event that we had in 2021. And I was noticing that they were not actually accurately reporting what happened in that storm. And that's really the main reason that I became interested in this. And I wrote a letter to the editor to explain more clearly what actually happened and what the causes of that were. And for those that have kept up with that, we know that our people in the state government here in Texas were trying to put most of the blame on renewable energy, the wind turbines and solar, which turned out not to be true in the final report that was issued by our federal government. And what actually turned out to be the case was that the vast majority of the blackouts that we incurred was due to the freezing of the natural gas pipelines, which fed the natural gas electrical generating plants. So that was very interesting, and I responded on this, and my article was published. We're also very active on social media. And that's
Joe,
Joe, can I ask a question there? When you write a letter of the editor like that, do they print it exactly as you wrote it, or do they edit it down or change it in any way?
So you'll see that in the instructions for all of the different newspapers, they do say that they have within their right to make edits. Typically, if they like what you're submitting, they may make some small edits. But in my personal experience, I've had 0 edits that I've noticed. This particular one, there were 0 edits. They published it verbatim. The one thing that they did change, though, is that I always include web links. Just like I do here on the slide page, you can see, the removal of coal natural gas. That's a web link. You can click on that. So I had the words there, and I had links embedded within that, and they removed my web links. But other than that, there were no other changes made. Good question, Andrew. Anyone that may be interested in participating in our media, I have my contact information there, Joe Garfunkel at joseph.garfunkel@gmail.com. I'm going to continue on. I always include a few examples of what we're doing on social media because I think it's interesting, and others might think it's interesting as well, just to see what we're putting out there. So this is our Twitter feed. It's at CCL-Houston, and I have a couple of pages here. I'm going to go through it quickly. But the first one on the left there was a tweet that we sent out on January 2nd. And we wrote here, "Your New Year's resolution, take action on climate and save money with tax credits. Read more." And so this was actually a Washington Post news article, and also a link there to the savings calculator to see what you can actually save by taking advantage of tax credits by actually taking some action. The one on the right there, we always do send out a New Year's kind of a card, season's greetings to everybody. And so we sent that out as well. A couple more here on the left there, news articles on the left there about beachfront erosion taking place. This is focused on Florida, but it's happening around all of the coasts that are being impacted by sea level rise. The one on the right there, the future of low carbon transportation. For those that didn't know, the Chevy Bolt was voted EV car of the year by Electric Company. An affordable family car with almost 250 miles of range at a price of about $25,000. So really interesting. The others I'm not going to read because we're running low on time, but just to show you the graphic images. And these are all out there on @CCL-Houston if anybody wants to take a look. A couple more here. The one on the left was our December holiday gathering for cookies and cocoa, holiday cheer. That was a nice photo there. A couple more. The one on the right here, I always like to include these editorial comics that I find in the news occasionally. You can see here 2 houses there that have been flooded out. And it says here, the good news is the threat of wildfire is relatively low today. So that was the good news, even though they were flooded out due to climate change. The one on the left is interesting. The future of low carbon transportation. The Tesla semi truck completes its first 500-mile trip with a full Class 8 80,000-pound load. That was very interesting. And the one on the right, I'm always on the lookout for new technology related to batteries because, as we know, renewable energy does have to rely on battery storage to get us through. And so there's always new types of batteries being invented. Very, very interesting topic there. And now I'm going to hand off to Dory for chapter development.
And I just welcome Diana and Neil to thank you for coming to the meeting. I just, as people join CCL, I welcome them, encourage them to be part of our Slack channel and find a home, find what drives your passion and get involved. Just by joining, you become involved, so that's great. You are a lobbyist. Now let's take some action, because the more of us that reach out to our legislators, the more often we call, the more often we, politely thank them for their work, but then keep nudging them in directions, gets bills like the IRA passed and more. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dory. And no time today for any breakout sessions, so we're really at the end of our meeting. And just want to thank everybody for joining, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you so much, Joe, and everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.